Service. Welcome here, friends. If you're new with us, as Kurt said, special welcome to you. My name is Paul, and I have the honor of serving here as the lead pastor. Now, last year, I had this really great opportunity and privilege to travel with a friend of mine. It was another pastor, and we were flying to a different place. And we kind of had this really interesting moment as we were boarding, because it was a moment that, kind of gave that perfect case study of what happens when we, or two or three people, look at a same situation but come out with different conclusions. Like we all had a same moment that we all thought differently about. Now the story is my friend had a backpack. Now it wasn't an oversized backpack, it was just a regular backpack. And as we sat down, the flight attendant asked him to put it under the seat in front of him, which you guys know the drill, right? Like those of you that have flown. But because it was his only bag, he was convinced it actually belonged in the overhead bin. So very politely, but with real conviction, he explained why it made more sense for the bag to go above. And he kind of had this back and forth with the flight attendant. And the flight attendant clearly already had a long night and just kind of gave a look and walked away. Now, it was at that point that my friend and I kind of made eye contact. And I'm not sure if it was like the confusion on my face or what it was, but he began to defend his logic. And his logic was pretty good. It went something like this. He said, just because other people overpack and take two bags on the plane, why should my legs suffer for their overpacking? Which kind of makes sense, right? But I was also kind of confident on the other side of things. Like if the flight attendant is asking you to put it under the seat, there's probably a good reason for it. It's probably where it actually belongs. Plus, if you have like a laptop or an iPad in there, it's easier to get to it. And it's not in the overhead bin where all the other suitcases are hitting your iPad and your computer, so it doesn't wreck them. So somewhere in that conversation, we were both convinced that we were right. We were coming from it from two different angles. We were looking at the same situation, and we're both thinking we're right. And I remember thinking, pastor friend, what will it actually hurt to put the bag under the seat? But that's how life works, isn't it? That's kind of how things and how we think. We usually are not trying to create conflict or arguments or disagree with people. We're not typically trying to do that. We're just deeply convinced that the way we do things is the right way. We're deeply convinced that the way we see the world is the right way. And everyone else, they just don't get it. So when that kind of happens to us, we typically or sometimes say, well, you do you, and I'll do what's right. Now, so for the last month, we've journeyed through some of the key characters in the book of Judges who did what was right in their eye. And last week, my pastor friend Curtis did an excellent job unpacking Gideon for us and how fear plays out a critical role in our lives. And now today, we come to the end of this whole series. And as we conclude this series, we come to the last words, the last verse in the book of Judges, which really have been the foundation and the anchor of our whole series. And the last verse says, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. Now, as we have seen over the past month, Israel was actually never meant to be without a king, because God was always meant to be their king. But as they stopped looking to him, as they stopped seeking his authority and his guidance and his wisdom, they lost sight of his character. They began looking around, looking to other gods, looking to other peoples. And as they did, they began to do what seemed right in their eyes. And what was right in their eyes led to chaos, violence, confusion, which led to this downward spiral that we've been talking about each week, which started with disobedience. They would do something wrong, and then there would be consequences that just come up from their wrongdoing. And as the consequences came up, they began to cry out for help. And God would step in and rescue them. He'd bring a judge. He would bring about a rescue. And then there would be kind of a peace for a while, and they'd be happy. But after a while, they would repeat the disobedience, the consequences, the crying out, and rescue. And it was just this downward spiral that just kept going on and on and on throughout the book of Judges. Now today, we're going to conclude with a story that exists right in the midst of this downward spiral. But unlike the previous stories, this story is not about armies, it's not about conquerors, judges, warriors, or even a national crisis. Rather, it's about everyday life. It's about bad economy, famine, a loss, a grief, and widows who are just trying to survive. Now, if I'm honest, for years I have read this story very, very quickly. For far too long, if I'm honest, I would be, okay, that's a nice little story. God is good. I want to move on. I never really stayed long enough to really wrestle with it or to chew on it. And if I think about why this was the case, as I contemplated and read this story over and over and over and prayed about it and was writing on it, I think the reason is that this story is just kind of simple. It's unimpressive. And as a younger person, as a young Christian, I was drawn to the big stories, kings and judges, battles and miracles, the dramatic ways God seemed to move in power, stories that took like really big swings. You know, there's good guys and bad guys, huge failures, and then moments of huge grace. But this story felt really small, really ordinary actually, easy to overlook. But yet, as I've spent significant time this week in it, I want to suggest that this story is actually central to our faith. In fact, it's critical to how and what we believe. It's critical about how and what we believe about God. So today I'm going to just tell you the whole story. It's not too long. I'm just going to retell the book. I may miss some parts, but I'm going to try to keep to all the big parts of the story. And I'm going to tell it all kind of in one sharing because it's that important. Now, this is a story of the book of Ruth. Now, the story starts like this. In those days, when judges ruled in Israel, severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. So we see that this story starts right in the downward spiral of time of Judges. This is where we find this story. It's located right in there. And right at that time, Israel is going through famine. There's bad economy. There's nothing to eat. So people are looking to go somewhere else. So now, if you can see Judah here on the west side of the Dead Sea, and then right across the Dead Sea, kind of southeast, was the ancient nation of Moab. So that's kind of where they're going to go. Those arrows are kind of helping us direct the way. So there's famine in Israel, and a family from a tribe of Judah decides, okay, we're going to leave, we're going to go to Moab. Now the man in this family, his name is Elimelech, and his wife's name is Naomi, and their 2 sons are Mahlon and Chilion. They arrive and settle in Moab, and after some time, their sons get older, and it's time for them to get married. Now the difficulty, of course, is that they are in Moab. There's no other Israelite women around for them to marry. They would have to marry Moabite women. Now, for an Israelite hearing this story right off the bat, there'd be like a flag going up right away. They know if Israelites marry other nations, this isn't good. This is not going to end well. So the way the story begins is actually priming us as readers or as listeners to be like, ooh, they're marrying outside of their nation. They're going to marry an outsider, and that's not good. Now, you see, in their imagination, outsiders are the problem. They don't know Yahweh. They don't know their God. And as we've been seeing through the book of Judges, the issue isn't marrying because of ethnicity or race. That's not at all what's happening here. It's always about worship. That's the problem. Because over time, when Israelites would marry other nations, they would forget Yahweh. They would get pulled into the relationships of the other nations and their gods. And as that happened, they began to, drift from Yahweh. Their understanding of life and character of God and how world works would be distorted. And slowly they would lose the distinct character that God wanted for them. And that distinct character was actually to be a light to Moabites and other nations. But when they married, they would lose that distinctness. So this is kind of what's happening here. As the author writes this out, we should have this kind of flag go up. Okay, they're traveling, they're going to outside of their nation, and now they're going to marry their people. Things are not going to good. That's kind of where things are playing out. So this family's in Moab, and the boys, they marry the Moabite women. And as time passes, everything actually does begin to unravel. Elimelech, the father, dies. Then one of the sons dies. And then the other son dies. So again, the early readers are like, yep, see, there you go. They went to Moab, and now everybody's dying. This isn't good. Of course it's going to happen. It's Moab. And then we have Naomi, this mother and wife, who's completely in grief and pain. Far from home, far from anything familiar. The only family she has left are her 2 daughters, and they are Moabites. And she draws this theological conclusion. She comes to this place where she thinks this is what is happening to her. This is how to understand God. And she pronounces in her grief and pain, God is against me. God has cursed me. God is not paying attention to me. God does not see me. God is not near. So she decides, I need to leave Moab. I need to return to Judah, back to Bethlehem. I need to go back. And she turns to her daughters-in-law and says, hey, look, I'm sorry. I never meant for your lives to turn out this way. I didn't think my life was going to turn out this way. So I'm going to go home. But you should stay. These are your people. You should remarry, build a life. God has clearly turned against me, so don't ruin your life. Stick around. And at first, both of the daughters are like, no, we'll stay with you. They refuse. They show this extraordinary loyalty, which actually speaks very highly of Naomi. But she keeps insisting, no, go. What are you thinking? I can't offer you any kind of life. I'm old. I don't have a husband. Like, what can I offer you? Like, if I have kids, even if I could have kids, and they get like older, will you wait for them to get older to marry them? Like, that doesn't make sense. Go back to your people. And eventually, one of them does go to her people in Moab and leaves Naomi. But the other, Ruth, chooses to go with Naomi. And that's actually a big deal. Because in the world of Judges that we've kind of been looking through through the weeks, this is not a safe or simple decision, especially for a woman. Think of the women and how they have been treated in Judges so far. It has not been good. It has not been good. But Ruth says, no, I'm going to go with you. Naomi again pushes back. They kind of have this back and forth. They say, you don't understand. This is dangerous. These are my people, not yours. Like, you'll be a foreigner there, a Moabite in Bethlehem. Who has heard of such thing? People will look at you and wonder, maybe even blame you for what's happened. I don't want that for you. And when I'm gone, like when I die, because I'm old, like who will take care of you? You'll be all alone, a stranger, an outsider. I don't want this for you. But Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. I'll just sit in this for a moment. In the time when everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes, here's a foreigner. Somebody we early in the book were like, oh, this is not good. They're going to marry Moabites. Here's a foreigner, a woman, choosing a different way. With one of the most beautiful and faithful vows in Scripture, she takes a step we have not yet seen in all of Judges. And with that vow, Ruth, a young Moabite widow, and Naomi, the older Israelite widow, make their way back to Bethlehem. They survive the journey, which is a little bit of a miracle in itself, and they get into town, and the people are super excited to see Naomi. They can't believe it. They're all celebrating. They run around her. They surround her. They're like, Naomi, you're back. Is it really you? What's happened? It's been years since we've seen you. And her response to this joy is one of pain and grief. And she says, do not call me Naomi. Don't call me that anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter. Now, names in the Bible are really significant. They give clues to help us understand what is going on and what to expect. Like, for example, one of the clues to why the town was so excited to see Naomi is given in her name. Because Naomi means pleasant, lovely, somebody who's sweet. So the lovely person of the community is back. That's why they're excited. She's been missed. This lovely, pleasant, sweet Naomi, she's back. But Naomi now declares that her name is Mara, bitter. In other words, the woman who once carried the name associated with sweetness now says, I'm no longer that person. That name no longer fits my life. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. I ain't your lovely. Don't call me pleasant. Call me bitter. And you can just feel the grief pouring out of her. I'm bitter. If there's God, I can't see him. If he's near, it doesn't feel like it. If those stories about his faithfulness are true, they don't feel true to me. I have lost everything. I've lost everyone I loved. Now, of course, if you've lived long enough, you can recognize that kind of grief. This kind of grief that doesn't just hurt you, it shakes you to the core. Some of you here know exactly what Naomi's feeling. So the story continues. And when Naomi and Ruth arrive in Bethlehem, it also just happens to be the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, that's also a really important detail in the book. And let me give you a little bit of context why it's important. In Israel, the landowners would have fields they planted and harvested each season. And when the harvest came, of course, the workers would go through the fields and gather the grain. Makes sense so far, right? We're a farming province. This all makes sense. But they weren't free to harvest however they wanted. There was a law, part of the law of Moses, that gave instructions about how to do this. They were to pass through the field once. And if anything was left behind, they were to actually leave it. Whatever remained was to be left. It was left for the poor, for the widow, for the foreigner, those without protection or provision. And they could gather what was left. So this was one of the ways God already had baked in laws and ways to care for the vulnerable. This was already part of the way life in community would look like. That people would not take too much. Because the law was never simply about just being religious. It was meant to form a people whose lives reflected the generous character of God. So those who had land were not meant to consume everything for themselves. They were to leave room at the edges. Whatever was missed, they were to leave it behind for the poor, the vulnerable, the widow, and the foreigner. So Naomi says to Ruth, we can't survive unless we do something. Like, I'm too old, I can't go work in the fields, but as a widow, the law allows you to gather. Like, we're not stealing, this is okay. This is how my God works. So go find a field and collect whatever you can so we have something to eat, so we don't die, so we can live. And so Ruth goes. This foreign woman is going to go provide for her mother-in-law in a way that is incredibly dangerous for her. She's going to step out in faithfulness and do something that she probably doesn't need to do. You see, she would be gathering alone in this whole field, and yes, there's other women and other people kind of scattered across the fields, but this is a male-dominated world. Ruth has no protection. As I keep saying, she's a foreigner, and the author wants us to actually feel this vulnerability she's in as she's going out and gleaning. But then in the story, it just so happens that she ends up in the field belonging to a man named Boaz. And Boaz comes out to his field, sees this unfamiliar foreign woman among the others and asks, like, who's this? What's going on here? Who's this lady? What's she doing? And they tell him. They're like, that's Ruth, the Moabite, Naomi's daughter-in-law. You see, the word has already spread about her because people are incredibly impressed and astounded by her faithfulness. They can't believe how she acts with such character. Because this is a foreign woman who chose loyalty over safety, leaving her home, her people, everything familiar to follow Naomi. And the word about this incredible faithfulness has spread, so they know her. So they tell him, that's Ruth. That's Ruth the Moabite. And Boaz is also impressed. So Boaz turns to his servants and says, do not treat her roughly. Do not touch her. Leave her alone. Now, there's a bit of a trigger warning here, but other translations say something like, do not molest her. Just consider what kind of world this must have been for something like that to even need it to be said. So Boaz is essentially placing Ruth under his protection. Let her glean. Do not touch her. I'm protecting her. Let her gather what she needs. Don't interfere. Treat her with respect. Because he sees something rare in her. She's a person of integrity who has taken real risk for the sake of another. So Ruth gleans and she takes things home and she carries far more grain than she was expecting. And Naomi notices right away, she's like, whoa, where did you get all this gleaning? Where did you get all of this? How did you get this much? And Ruth says, well, I was in the field of a man named Boaz. And Naomi pauses, she's like, Boaz? Well, this is kind of a big deal because he's not just a generous landowner, he's a relative of her late husband. She knows him, which means he could be what Israel called kinsman redeemer. Now, the closest way to think about a kinsman redeemer is this. It's like an image of a close family relative who had both the ability and the responsibility to step in when family was in serious trouble. Now, it was not automatic. They were not forced to do this. But if they chose to step in, they could act on the behalf of the vulnerable relative, which would include these roles and responsibilities. First, they would protect and provide for the vulnerable family member. Meaning they took responsibility for them. They brought in whoever was left exposed, especially widows, and those without support, helping to ensure they were not left to survive on their own. So they would, protect and provide for this vulnerable family member. They would buy back any lost property. So if land has been lost due to debt or hardship, the Redeemer could purchase it back so it remained within the family, right? It wasn't necessarily this all his now. He bought it back so it could remain in that family. And then he would redeem family members from slavery. If someone had fallen into debt and was forced into servitude, the Redeemer could pay the cost to bring them back to freedom. And finally, a kinsman redeemer could preserve the family line. In certain cases, if a man died without an heir, the redeemer could step in and help carry on the family name and inheritance. So Naomi finds out that it's Boaz. And if he's willing, he could be the kinsman redeemer for her family. So Naomi says to Ruth, you need to go to Boaz. You need to go to him. And honestly, you need to ask him if he'll be your kinsman redeemer, which means you need to ask him to marry you. But it's actually more than that. Like sometimes we just say to marry in this situation, but actually in this Hebrew context here, it's more than that. It's all the kinsman redeemer part. It's ask him if he will cover us. Is he willing to restore what's been lost? Is he willing to take ownership and help us? And that's really important to understand because this moment isn't a Hallmark kind of love story. The way we might be tempted to read it, they fell in love, and some have explained it that way. This is not Ruth taking advantage of an old man either. Nor is this an old man taking advantage of a young woman, as some have suggested. I don't think so. I don't think that's what's happening here. What the authors want us to notice here is that both Ruth and Boaz are not simply following what feels right in the moment. They're not doing what so many in the Judges have done. They're going beyond that. Instead, they're choosing something costly, inconvenient. They're choosing covenant faithfulness, a kind of others-centered love in this moment. Because being kinsman redeemer was not automatic. It was a choice. And it wasn't an easy choice. For a man to step into that role meant taking on real responsibility, not just for Ruth, but for Naomi, for their future, for the other families he doesn't even know belong in Moab. He's responsible for the whole family line, even for the land that might have been lost to debt and money and costs. And whatever came from it wouldn't ultimately benefit him. It would restore someone else's legacy. So for someone established and wealthy, there was a sense of risk and sacrifice. For Boaz, it's one thing to let her glean your field. It's another thing entirely to bring her and everything attached to her into your family. And for Ruth, for this foreign woman, this is an act of deep vulnerability. She's asking knowing he could say no. And then what? He could say no and then take advantage of her. He can take advantage knowing she's in despair. Like, what else is she going to do? Who's she going to tell? So it's vulnerable and sacrificial and hard. But Ruth goes in obedience, in humility, in courage, in faith, and she asks, will you be my redeemer? Will you restore my family? And Boaz says yes. But even then, even when he says yes, he acts with honor and says, there's a complication here though. There's someone closer than me in line, and he has the first right to redeem you. So Boaz right away in the story isn't cutting corners. He doesn't try to work around it. He doesn't try to find another way. He goes to the city gate. Now, city gates were a place where decisions and legal process was made. And he brings everything in light of all the other elders and all the other people. And he says to the other relative of Naomi's, he says, Naomi is selling the land that was lost to debt and famine and all those kind of things that belonged to her husband. If you redeem it, you also need to take responsibility for Ruth, this Moabite, in order to preserve the family line. So we can now see how costly this was actually for Boaz. Because the other relative looks at it and he's like, no thanks. I'm not doing that. I'm not jeopardizing my estate. This is too complicated, it's too costly, it's too uncertain. I don't know what comes with this Moabite. I don't know her crazy family on the other side of the Dead Sea. I don't know what this will do to my family, my future, my inheritance. No thank you. You go ahead and redeem it if you want. And Boaz, this honorable man who sees the integrity and courage in Ruth, who recognizes her character, steps forward and says, I will redeem her. And he marries Ruth. Now, honestly, that could be the end of the story, right? One honorable man sees an honorable woman, in the middle of chaotic culture of judges, does the right thing. He takes the risk, welcomes this vulnerable outsider, provides protection, restores the family line. He saves the day, and we can close the book. We're like, yeah, we have our hero, Boaz. And that's how most of these stories end, don't they? But this story, friends, is far better than that. Because in a time when God's own people are doing what is right in their own eyes, ignoring God's ways, we begin to see something unexpected throughout the entire book. God's kingdom is working from the margins of society. See, this is a story about Ruth, a foreigner, a widow, a woman, in a world where there was every reason to overlook her. The biblical authors refuse to let us do that. Because while Israel is losing sight of God's heart, it is this Moabite woman, this outsider, who embodies it. You see, what the authors want us to see is that God's kingdom is most often found closest to those who are dismissed, overlooked, and pushed to the margins. See, the early hearers of the stories, this would have been just radical. A Moabite is the hero? Are you kidding me? Now, we miss that irony because we're like, Moab, but what is that today? I don't know. But this would be like, and you can fill in the blank of the person you don't like, maybe an enemy. And they are the hero in the story? Are you serious? They're the ones that are doing something right? That doesn't make sense. Ruth, a Moabite, is faithful. God is working from the margins, which means we can no longer be dismissive and arrogant. We need to actually pay attention to God's work in those we don't see, notice, recognize. And those that are not empowered in a place of power and positions of, importance. The book is forcing us to notice God's work in the ordinary, unnoticed people, even a foreign widow. So Ruth and Boaz are married, and they have a son named Obed. And there's this beautiful moment where Naomi, once bitter, once convinced that God had abandoned her, is now holding this child. She holds Obed. As Michelangelo's artwork here, and it's like, if you look at that kid, you're like, that's a kid that's named Obed, for sure. Right? Like he looked, I don't know. I looked at it, I was like, that's Obed. And she's holding him tenderly. And it's as if she realizes, I was wrong. God had not abandoned me. God was at work. Even when I couldn't see it, even when I couldn't understand it, how could God work through these foreign women? And it's this beautiful moment of redemption and healing and reconciliation. But even that is not the end of the story. Because Obed grows up and has a son named Jesse. And Jesse grows up and he has a bunch of sons, and one of them is named David. Yes, that David. King David, if you know the story. And then generation after generation, as the Gospel of Matthew tells us, about 25 pregnancies later, it all leads to the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, born in Bethlehem. Which means, in the time of Judges, when people did not have a king and did whatever was right in their own eyes, in that time, through the small, ordinary life of a vulnerable, overlooked foreigner, this grief-stricken widow, God was preparing the way for the king. Friends, this is a glimpse of how God's kingdom comes, how he's at work in this world, in and through the most ordinary, dismissed, grief-stricken people who choose faithfulness, who stick to their promises even when the world is spiraling. So what if? What if the places in your life that feel very small, overlooked, even bitter, are not places where God is absent, but places where his kingdom is already breaking in? What if, like Ruth, your story is not over? Even if it feels like it is. And what if the ordinary, faithful choices in front of you right now, the ones that don't feel very impressive at all, are actually the very places where God's story is moving forward? You see, you do you feels right for a reason. Our hopes, our wounds, our experiences, even our joys, or the stories our culture tells us, they all point us in the same direction. Follow what feels right, define your own path, do all this stuff as long as no one gets hurt. But this story reveals something much, much, much better. The story of Ruth reminds us that our lives are not random, not abandoned, not outside of God's care. They are actually caught up in a larger story, a story where even loss is not the end, where even bitterness can be held by grace, and where God is faithfully bringing about redemption in ways we often cannot yet see. I'm not sure how Obed would know that he'd be eventually the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus. How would Ruth and Boaz know that? The only way this could be true is if they were faithful in their ordinary, plain, regular lives. So if that's true, if our lives are being shaped, if we are caught up in a story bigger than ourselves, then the question becomes, how do we actually live into that story? Because it's one thing to believe it, right? And I think often as Christians, we're like, just believe. And there's going to be a lot of beliefs in the statements, but I actually believe that it's important. We should believe. But it's one thing to believe, and it's another thing to begin to actually practice it. So as we're coming into a last week of Lent and into this Holy Week coming up, I want to offer 3 simple practices. First, can I encourage you to name it? Name where you have been living in your own terms. Name where you have been certain you were right in your eyes and you're just going to do what you're going to do because, hey, look, I've been hurt, I've been taken advantage of, I've been wounded. Hey, this actually brings me joy. Name whatever that thing is that has caused you to live in a way that you think you're just so certain you're right. Where you've been living in your own terms, whether it's your relationships, your words, your habits, your desires, your money, your time. Where have you been living on your own terms? Name it. And then simply surrender it. And it could be just a simple prayer. Jesus, I've been trying to be king of my own life. I've just been trying to rule and do whatever I think is right. Doing whatever I want to do. And it hasn't been working. Maybe for a season it has, but I know something's missing. So I want to give it all back to you, God. I want you to be the Lord of my life. I want you to be the king of my life. So name it and then surrender it. And then act on it. What is one small, faithful, ordinary step I can take or you can take today that reflects the way of Jesus instead of my way? And friends, here's the good news. We don't do this to earn God's love. We don't do this to earn his grace or his attention. We do this because of his great faithfulness. We respond to what he already offers. God is already faithful. He's already steadfast. He's already present. He's already there in our ordinary lives. He's already at work, even when we can't see it. But by naming it, surrendering it, and acting on it, we learn to practice the same faithfulness, one small, ordinary step at a time.